You have to imagine a ship so powerful it could bring an entire nation to its knees. For me, the Bismarck was the Death Star. It was a kind of mechanized warfare that hopefully will never exist again.
Deep beneath the Atlantic, the Bismarck rests in eternal darkness, a giant of steel and secrets. Explorers have reached its rusted decks, yet one chamber remains untouched, sealed tight against the crushing pressure of the deep. Sensors detect subtle activity inside, unlike anything expected from a ship sunk decades ago. What lies within this locked space defies explanation, and every expedition leaves with a growing sense that the ship is not entirely silent. The deep-sea monster and the faint heartbeat. The Bismarck began as an ambitious dream inside German shipyards. Its construction started in 1936, and every stage of its development carried a sense of scale and power that few warships of the time could match. When it touched the water for the first time in 1939, it was clear that this was not an ordinary battleship. It was the symbol of a nation preparing to project strength across the seas. On 24 August 1940, the Bismarck officially entered service in the German Navy, known as the Kriegsmarine. The ceremony marked not only the birth of a ship, but the arrival of a giant that would soon become one of the most feared machines of the Second World War. The design of the Bismarck reflected a single intention. It had to dominate. It carried a full load displacement of more than 50,000 tons, making it one of the heaviest battleships ever built in Europe. Its main armament consisted of 8 huge 38-centimeter each capable of firing massive shells over long distances with frightening accuracy. These sat inside towering turrets that looked like fortresses rising from the steel deck. Despite its size, the Bismarck moved with surprising speed. It could travel at more than 30 knots, a remarkable ability for a ship so large. This combination of firepower and speed made it a dangerous opponent and a serious threat to anyone who crossed its path. Germany built the Bismarck for an important mission. The ship was created to strike at Allied supply lines that stretched across the Atlantic. In May 1941, the Bismarck joined the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen for a bold operation known as Operation Rheinübung. Their goal was to break into the North Atlantic and attack the merchant convoys that were carrying essential supplies to Britain.
One of Bismarck's shells penetrates the hood's thinly armored decks and ignites her aft powder magazines. The resulting firestorm rips the hood in half.
If these supplies slowed down or stopped, Britain would face a serious crisis. The German Naval Command knew this and believed that the Bismarck could tip the balance of the war at sea. The Bismarck did not take long to make its presence known. On 24 May 1941, it encountered 2 British warships, HMS Hood and HMS Prince of Wales. The battle that followed became one of the most dramatic moments of the naval war. Hood, the pride of the British fleet, exploded after a hit from Bismarck. The blast split the ship in two and it sank within minutes. Only 3 men survived. The Prince of Wales continued the fight, but suffered damage and was forced to withdraw. In a single battle, the Bismarck had changed the mood of the Allied forces. It had shown its terrifying power, and now Britain was determined to hunt it down. The British pursued the Bismarck with everything they had. They launched ships, aircraft, and every available resource across the ocean. A critical moment arrived when a slow and fragile swordfish aircraft from the aircraft carrier Ark Royal managed to deliver a hit with a torpedo. The torpedo struck the rear of the Bismarck and damaged the steering gear. This left the ship unable to navigate properly and locked into a slow, circular path. The hunter had become the hunted. On 27 May 1941, the final battle arrived. British battleships King George V and Rodney opened fire, and unleashed a storm of shells. The Bismarck fought back, but its fate was already sealed. After hours of bombardment, the ship was left burning and broken. The German crew made the decision to scuttle the ship so it would not fall into enemy hands. Out of more than 2,000 men, only about 110 survived. The rest went down with the giant. The Bismarck disappeared into the dark Atlantic for nearly half a century. On the 8th of June, 1989, explorer Robert Ballard and his team found the wreck at a depth of almost 4,800 meters. It rested about 650 kilometers west of Brest in France. The remains of the battleship sit silent on the ocean floor, a colossal shadow from the past. Some divers have reported that the metal seems strangely intact in places, almost as if something inside still holds on. And what they found inside surprised everyone. The eerie gel and the science that doesn't fit. When researchers approached the wreck for the first time, they expected to find only twisted metal and scattered remains shaped by time and pressure. Instead, they found something far more unsettling. The atmosphere around the wreck carried a strange sense of stillness, almost as if the ship had been frozen in the moment of its final fall. The Bismarck lies upright on the seabed, an unusual position for a ship that had been battered by bombardment and then dragged into the deep. Large sections of its superstructure have collapsed or disappeared, leaving empty spaces where command towers and observation platforms once stood. The deck looks fractured in many places, but the main body of the ship looks strangely calm, almost untouched by the violence that took it down. Several expeditions have recorded the wreck in high clarity using video lights that cut through the darkness. Those images reveal a massive steel body resting like a sleeping giant in a world without sound. One of the most surprising findings came from the ship's hull. Robert Ballard, the man who located the wreck, made an observation that puzzled many scientists. At such an extreme depth, the pressure is powerful enough to crush steel if there are trapped pockets of air inside a sinking structure. But the Bismarck's hull did not implode. Instead, it remained intact in a way that suggested something unusual had taken place before the ship reached the sea floor. Ballard believed the internal compartments must have flooded completely during the final moments of the sinking. If water filled every space inside, it would equalize the pressure and prevent the hull from collapsing as it sank. This meant the Bismarck had already died from the inside before it disappeared into the deep. The wreck sits near a ravined underwater slope, not far from the remains of an extinct volcano. The seafloor in this region is not flat. It looks torn and rugged, shaped by ancient eruptions and shifting sediments. When the Bismarck hit the bottom, the impact sent debris rolling down the slope. Plates of metal, pieces of machinery, and fragments of the broken superstructure scattered across the ravine. Some sections slid into deeper grooves, while others remained balanced against rocky outcrops. The forces that acted on the wreck as it settled created scars that can still be seen in the surrounding sediment. Over the decades, nature has begun claiming the Bismarck in its own slow and patient way. Deep-sea wrecks do not decay like objects on land. There is no sunlight and very little oxygen at these depths. Instead, what forms on the steel are rusticles. These are strange and fragile structures shaped by chemical reactions and microbial life. They hang from the hull like frozen tears, long and irregular, made from a mixture of rust and bacterial growth. They look as if the ship has begun to grow a skin of brittle coral. The slow, dripping shapes create an eerie atmosphere that feels almost alive when seen in the glow of submersible lamps. Some researchers noticed patches of gel-like material on certain parts of the wreck. These formations appeared soft but firm, almost like a deep-sea sponge fused with the metal. Scientists believe these patches come from living microbial colonies feeding on the iron and minerals released by the decaying hull. These organisms survive in conditions that seem impossible for life. They operate in complete darkness, with crushing pressure all around them, and they feed on metal as if it were normal food. The presence of this living gel raises questions about what other forms of life may exist in the deep ocean, far beyond human reach. The SOS in the abyss. As researchers returned to the Bismarck again and again, they began using more advanced tools to scan its surroundings. The deep ocean is a world where light cannot reach, so scientists rely on sound to understand what hides in the darkness. Modern marine archaeology depends heavily on acoustic technology. Submersibles and research ships send out repeated pings into the black water. Each ping travels outward until it hits something solid. The sound then returns as an echo, and computers convert these echoes into images. This is how researchers create maps of the sea floor, revealing cliffs, valleys, and wrecks with remarkable clarity. Near a structure as huge as the Bismarck, these echoes form an unmistakable signature, like a shadow made from sound. The first detailed acoustic scans of the wreck showed the battleship resting in a kind of underwater cradle. The surrounding landforms influenced how the echoes moved, sometimes scattering them in strange ways. The ravine beside the hull created a natural sound trap that caused returning signals to stretch or bend. This effect can confuse instruments and occasionally produce readings that feel unnatural to anyone who studies them closely. It is not a sign of intelligence or meaning, only the physics of sound meeting a fractured landscape in the deep. Even so, the ocean is never silent. At that depth, water moves with slow, powerful currents that rub against rocks and ancient volcanic formations. This movement creates a constant low hum. Marine creatures also contribute to the underwater soundscape. Some produce clicks, while others release faint pulses or vibrations as they swim. These noises can mix with the echoes from sonar equipment. To a trained ear, they are simply environmental sounds. To an untrained one, they may feel like messages or signals drifting through the water. Engineers who analyze such data know that the deep sea always produces surprises that seem meaningful at first but reveal themselves to be nothing more than natural noise. Despite this, whispers of something unusual near the Bismarck began circulating among a few researchers years after the wreck was first charted. Some claimed that long-duration recordings captured an intermittent pattern of sound that did not match the usual hum of water or the clicks of marine animals. The rumor grew more curious because of what the pattern reminded listeners of when slowed down and filtered. It loosely resembled 3 short bursts, followed by 3 longer ones, then 3 short bursts again. To anyone familiar with maritime history, this sequence carries a heavy meaning. It is the structure of the old SOS signal, the traditional Morse call for help. Morse code had been one of the most important tools for communication at sea during the early 20th century. The SOS signal, with its short, 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 long, 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 short, short, short pattern, was adopted in 1908. It became a universal cry for danger or distress. But Morse code was a function of radio telegraphy. It depended on human operators, mechanical keys, and electrical pulses broadcast through the air. It was not something that could come naturally from the deep sea. It certainly was not something that could echo from a silent ship crushed by time. Experts were quick to dismiss the rumor. They explained that acoustic signals in the ocean do not behave like radio transmissions. Morse code requires precise timing and intentional action. The ocean simply cannot create such patterns on purpose. They pointed out that the supposed SOS sequence could have been the result of overlapping noise, perhaps caused by shifting metal plates on the wreck or the movement of geological structures around it. Even the passage of a distant submarine or an unexpected equipment glitch on a research vessel could produce misleading shapes in the data. But not everyone felt satisfied with these explanations. The Bismarck's resting place is extraordinarily quiet. So many of the usual sources of interference are absent. The deep sea does not speak in words or messages. Yet sometimes it creates illusions that stir human emotions. In that quiet space, even random vibrations can feel like forgotten voices struggling to rise through the depths. To find out whether the pattern was truly an illusion or something else, let's go back and see from where the story of Bismarck actually started. The secret blueprint and project Nebelhorn-Sieben. Long before the Bismarck sank into the Atlantic darkness, its story began inside rooms filled with blueprints, rulers, and the sharp smell of ink.
Sinking, and she sank very fast. So in that sort of instance, you would expect just by the violence of the sinking, a lot of her deck equipment could be, sort of washed away.
Every part of the ship came from a precise design. Nothing about the Bismarck was left to chance. Its shape, armor, compartments, and weapons were all drawn carefully by engineers who believed they were creating the future of naval power. These drawings still exist today in naval archives. They show cross-sections of the hull, the thickness of the armor plates, and the placement of every room from ammunition storage to crew quarters. To anyone who studies them, the plans look like the inner map of a giant steel creature. The original documents created by Blohm and Voss, the company that built the battleship, were preserved with remarkable care, despite the chaos of the war. German naval engineering at the time followed strict rules. Every bolt, cable, and turret had to be recorded with absolute accuracy. This meant endless pages of plans copied and stored inside the Kriegsmarine archives. Even today, historians and model makers rely on these documents. They recreate the ship in miniature form or analyze specific details that help scholars understand how the Bismarck functioned during its short but violent career. As researchers studied these records, they noticed something unusual. Hidden among the familiar sheets of armor layout and mechanical systems were a few files marked with titles that did not match standard material. These pages were not part of the official engineering set. They carried labels that referenced a separate internal research study. The name attached to them was quiet and almost forgettable, yet it stood out because it did not appear in ordinary naval paperwork. The project was called Nebelhorn-Sieben. Most references to this project are brief and appear only in passing, almost as if someone tried to remove the details but left behind faint traces. Some historians believe Nebelhorn-Sieben may have been an experimental research directive linked to structural reinforcement or compartment flooding behavior. If this is true, the project might have focused on how the ship would react to different kinds of damage. It could explain why the Bismarck sank the way it did, with water filling the compartments in a manner that kept the hull from collapsing under the pressure of the deep ocean. The name Nebelhorn suggests a reference to Germanic mythology. In some stories, it implies a warning call or a signal tied to distant echoes. The addition of Sieben, meaning seven, may hint at a numbered series of classified trials. Taken together, the title creates an unsettling impression. It feels like an attempt to hide a program inside a piece of folklore. The blueprints tied to Nebelhorn-Sieben look slightly different from the standard sheets. The lines are darker, and some sections include symbols not seen in ordinary naval drawings. They show subtle changes to compartment walls, unusual reinforcement patterns, and odd internal pathways that seem impractical for crew movement. These features do not match the final construction of the Bismarck, yet they appear close enough to raise questions. They feel like an early concept that was quietly tested or considered, then officially abandoned. When the Bismarck sailed into the Atlantic for its final mission, it carried one of the most advanced communication suites used by the German Navy at the time. Deep inside the armored heart of the ship were rooms filled with radio tables, headphones, transmitters, and encryption devices that allowed the crew to send and receive messages across long distances. Operators trained for months to master the equipment. They listened for faint signals hidden inside the static and used encrypted channels to communicate with the fleet. Shortwave radio was their lifeline. It connected the Bismarck to headquarters, to weather stations, and to the Prinz Eugen during the early stages of Operation Rheinübung. Communication was the breath of a warship. Every order from Berlin, every sighting report, and every urgent call passed through these rooms. The sailors who worked there sat in near darkness, surrounded by glowing dials and the steady whisper of static. They were the unseen voices of the ship. During the battle with the Hood and the Prince of Wales, they stayed at their posts as the hull shook under the force of incoming shells. Even as smoke filled the passageways, they continued sending updates, knowing the fate of the ship depended on the flow of information. But the final hours of the Bismarck brought chaos to every part of the vessel. As British ships closed in, the Bismarck attempted to send its last messages. Some were pleas for support. Others contained desperate status reports. Then came the torpedo strike that crippled the steering gear. From that moment onward, communication became more erratic. Damage teams worked to keep the generators alive, but fire and flooding advanced faster than they could contain. When the British battleships opened fire during the last engagement, shells tore through the upper levels and obliterated several communication compartments. Radio masts snapped, antennas broke away, panels burst apart. By the time water reached those rooms, the equipment was already ruined. Then comes the crew, and you would be surprised to know the shocking details of their final hours aboard the Bismarck. The missing men of the Bismarck. When the Bismarck began its final journey across the Atlantic, it carried more than steel and ammunition. It carried lives. Inside the long corridors and narrow compartments, more than 2,000 men lived, worked, and prepared for the battles that would decide their fate. The ship's complement included enlisted sailors, officers, engineers, gunners, signal operators, radio specialists, cooks, and even a small fleet command staff that joined for Operation Rheinübung. In total, the ship carried around 2,200 men when it left port.
The mighty battleship Bismarck was drifting to the bottom of the Atlantic, and out of a crew of over 2,200 men, only 114 survived one of the most brutal naval attacks seen in the entire war.
Every one of them became part of a story that would end at the bottom of the ocean. The men of the Bismarck came from many parts of Germany. Some were seasoned sailors who had survived storms, raids, and the grinding pressure of war. Others were barely out of training. Many had never been on a ship so large or so powerful before. They slept in crowded bunks stacked like shelves, ate in narrow mess halls, and carried out duties in the rhythmic environment of a warship. Engines pounded, chains rattled, orders echoed through metal corridors. Life on board was loud and full of tension, yet the crew developed a connection to their ship. Many later described it as a world of its own. When the Bismarck fought the Hood and the Prince of Wales, the crew felt the shock of every shell that struck the hull. They were deep inside the structure, but the vibrations traveled through the steel like distant thunder. Some men never knew what happened on the surface. They only heard alarms, shouted commands, and the rising sense of fear when damage reports came flooding in. Still, they followed their duties. They had trained for emergencies and worked with discipline even while the giant ship trembled under fire. As the days passed and the British fleet closed in, the atmosphere on board changed. The crew could hear the engine struggling each time the ship tried to turn. They knew something critical had been damaged. When the torpedo hit the steering gear, many sailors felt the impact through the decks. The ship shuddered and then drifted off its intended path. Officers rushed to the compartments near the damaged rudder, but the situation grew worse as flooding increased. Some areas filled with water so quickly that the men inside had no chance to escape. When the Bismarck finally rolled and disappeared beneath the surface, it carried almost all of its men with it. Out of more than 2,200 crew members, only about 110 survived. These survivors were pulled from the freezing water by British ships. Some clung to floating debris. Others drifted half-conscious. Many were suffering from shock, burns, or exhaustion.
A tender comes alongside with a very different cargo. They are the German sailors who were picked out of the water when the Bismarck went down. Probably you can't in honesty say that you're glad they were rescued. They belong to a race that has stained the face of the wide world with the blood of innocent men, women, and children. But the Navy picked them up because that is the Navy's tradition.
The British rescuers did what they could, but the sea was cruel. When a German submarine was believed to be approaching, the British ships were forced to stop the rescue. Many men still alive in the water vanished beneath the waves as their chance of survival slipped away. Naval lists from the Kriegsmarine documented every man assigned to the ship. British reports recorded how many were taken aboard. Survivor interviews conducted after the war provided personal accounts of what happened during the final hours. Yet, even with complete lists and careful documentation, certain details feel strangely incomplete. Some compartments were never accessed during the sinking. Some men were never seen at their stations in the final minutes. A handful of names in the archives appear without final confirmation of where they were last assigned. These are not mysteries created by secrecy. They are the natural shadows left by a disaster that unfolded violently and quickly. Still, when researchers visit the wreck recently, they speak of an odd sensation near the silent steel halls. It is the feeling that the ship still carries the presence of men who once lived inside it. Most of them never reached the surface. Their final moments remain locked deep within the cold metal resting in the abyss. This chilling presence shifted everyone's focus to a new question. Why has no black box or definitive record of their last moments ever been found? And could the actual information still be hidden somewhere within the wreck? Execute Signal 9 and the locked black box. Long before the Bismarck fired its first shot, Allied intelligence had already begun weaving invisible threads around it. British codebreakers at Bletchley Park worked day and night to break Enigma messages that flowed between German ships and command stations. Their success allowed the Royal Navy to track the movements of the Bismarck, even when the ship vanished behind fog and distance. These intercepted signals played a crucial role in the hunt, yet none of them contained references to anything called Signal 9. In the official archives, no code phrase by that name appears. It does not exist in fleet orders, not in tactical instructions, not in emergency protocols. It is simply not there. And that is where the unease begins. Years after the war, a few historians noticed stories told by surviving sailors that mentioned something strange. During the last night before the final battle, there was talk of an order delivered quietly between certain officers. This was never written down in the official logs. According to one account, a whispered phrase passed through the ship like a shadow. It moved from the radio room to the bridge and then down to Central Command. The phrase was short, and it carried a feeling of urgency. Sailors remembered only fragments. They did not know its meaning. Some believed it signaled the start of internal preparation for the scuttling charges. Others thought it was related to protecting classified equipment. Later retellings gave the mysterious phrase a simple name that has persisted ever since. They called it Signal 9. Official records deny its existence. That denial has never stopped the stories. The idea becomes even stranger when connected to another rumor, one that has grown louder since the wreck was found. It involves something described as the locked black box. Modern ships carry flight recorders or their naval equivalents, but nothing like that existed during the Second World War. Warships relied on handwritten logs, coded radio sheets, and notes kept by officers. Nothing inside the Bismarck would resemble a modern recorder. This is a solid historical fact. Yet divers who explored the wreck often mentioned a sealed compartment inside the officer deck that appeared unusually reinforced. This compartment was not marked on the standard blueprints. It does not appear in the preserved construction records. The walls looked thicker than surrounding structures, as if built to protect something important. It sits crushed and twisted now, buried under collapsed steel beams. Nobody has been able to access its interior. Ballard documented the location in his 1989 expedition, but the submersibles could not penetrate the debris. The later MIR dives in 2001 took better images, yet even they could not reach inside. What lies within remains unknown. Scientists insist the compartment probably stored sensitive materials such as classified documents or encryption equipment. This explanation fits the period. It is logical, yet the rumors persist because of one detail noted by the MIR team. The metal covering the crushed chamber had fractured in a way that looked almost unnatural. It cracked outward instead of inward, as if something inside pushed against it during the descent. Water pressure should have crushed it inward. The outward fracture line created questions that no one could easily answer. The crew logs recovered from survivors mention no last-minute transfer of materials. They do not mention a sealed container. They do not mention an internal vault. And still, the stories grew after the war, especially among former intelligence officers who believed the ship carried more than what appears in official records. Some proposed that Signal 9, whatever it truly meant, referred to an internal directive to destroy all sensitive equipment before the ship fell into enemy hands. Others believed it ordered the activation of a final protective measure for certain documents. The darkest version of the rumor suggested that Signal 9 was a last command to lock away something inside the unknown chamber, something that was not meant to reach the surface again. The truth is this: Allied intelligence decrypted many Enigma messages, but they never found a command with that name. The Bismarck carried no modern recorder, and no expedition has uncovered any functioning device inside the wreck. Every tool used by the MIR dives, and Ballard's team confirms the same conclusion. The ship lies silent, broken, and empty. And yet there is still that unexplained reinforced section buried beneath rusted decks. A chamber sealed in steel, visible but unreachable. A space that official plans do not describe. It rests quietly on the ocean floor, as if guarding something that time has not touched. Whatever it holds remains locked in the darkness, waiting inside the ruins of a ship that once terrified the Atlantic. What do you think truly happened deep inside the Bismarck's final hours? Share your thoughts in the comments.